In this video, I'm going to present how Hearthstone killed its best deck. Let's not argue over which deck is the best deck and instead talk about all of them. The best deck from Hearthstone's early days was Combo Druid, sometimes called Token Druid. It was the original Druid deck revolving around the Force of Nature plus Savage Roar combo. I'll explain that later if you're unfamiliar. We know this was the best deck in the game because when they introduced the Classic mode in 2021, we got to experience the old game with modern knowledge and stat tracking tools like HS Replay. It was the best Classic deck, and it wasn't close. On top of Force of Nature, Savage Roar combo, the deck benefited from busted cards like Wild Growth and Original Innervate. Speaking of which, let's talk about how the deck tried to win games. The deck's early game strategy was to skip it, either by ramping with Wild Growth, or by playing out a large minion early using Innervate and perhaps the coin, such as the infamous turn 1 Childwind Yeti. Beyond these two power plays, the deck primarily aimed to compete for board by playing the best minion from hand it could each turn, hoping to stick them for chip damage or additional bodies to benefit from Savage Roar on its combo turns. Given most decks shared similar minions and threats, Druid's ability to ramp ahead on mana and cheat out these powerful minions early meant that it almost always was successful in winning the board and reducing the opponent to low enough health to be able to finish them off with what was one of the most powerful combos in Hearthstone's early years. By playing Force of Nature, you added 3 2-attack minions with charge to your board. By playing Savage Roar after Force of Nature, you then gave those tokens all an additional 2 attack, as well as your hero 2 attack, meaning this 2-card combo dealt at minimum 14 damage if there were no other minions in play. Due to how powerful these ramp, mana cheating, and combo damaging cards were, the deck and the Druid class had to be weakened. You see, not only was this the best deck in the 2014 patch that the Classic mode was based on, but this deck dominated for years, only finally getting changed with the introduction of the game formats, Standard and Wild. The patch notes from 2016 read, "This patch saw the largest set of card changes since the game's closed beta, in preparation for the arrival of game formats. The intention of the changes was to address an over-reliance on cards from these sets, resulting in stale gameplay as new cards are unable to outstrip those already available options. By nerfing basic and classic cards, the developers hoped to help the release of new content to be more impactful, resulting in a more dynamic and shifting meta, as well as a less stale experience for deck builders." So as mentioned, in this patch, they nerfed both this deck and the Druid class. Let's start with how they nerfed this specific deck. And that change was, of course, to the namesake, Force of Nature. Force of Nature's cost was reduced from 6 to 5. However, the text was changed from summon 3 2-attack 2-health Treants with charge that die at the end of the turn to summon 3 2-attack 2-health Treants. That's it. That's a pretty drastic change for them back in this time. We're moving the OTK from hand combo entirely from the game. To also weaken the Druid class as a whole moving forward, a couple of surrounding cast members, we'll call them, also got hit. The first of which was Ancient of Lore. I haven't even mentioned this card yet, but if having Ramp, the best mana cheating card the game has ever seen, an Innervate, and a 14 damage from hand combo wasn't enough, it also had an incredibly strong draw card minion that every Druid deck at the time would run if it made any sense at all. This is a card that would allow you to draw 2 cards or restore 5 health when you're playing a fairly statted minion, and you'd almost always draw the 2 cards, which was a really powerful effect on a body that wasn't understatted nearly enough for the time to compensate for that effect. The second supporting cast member was less powerful, but also still very good, and also still in basically every Druid deck. And that card is Keeper of the Grove. Keeper of the Grove was changed from a 2-attack 4-health minion to a 2-attack 2-health minion. The reason for this is Keeper of the Grove was a very strong and versatile minion that combined silence with solid stats, and in the early days of Hearthstone, silence was an incredibly powerful mechanic. From the notes, whether or not to introduce a source of silence to a deck should require some decision making, so Keeper of the Grove shouldn't be default choice for all Druid decks. Given its decent stats at 2-4, the ability to either use the 2 damage to finish something off or silence, it was a no-brainer to always include this in the deck. This patch also technically nerfed a neutral card that was included in this deck also, because given that we've established this deck stuck around for years, that means it saw play through the era of Dr. Boom, and as a result, found itself running Big Game Hunter. But at this point, we're just discussing this patch and the meta at the time more than this Druid deck, so let's be a chicken and cross the road onto the next deck. Undertaker Hunter. This is another deck from Hearthstone's early days that first became playable following the release of the first adventure, Curse of Naxxramas. Undertaker Hunter in its simplest form is an aggro deck. Its cheap minions of choice are Death Rattle minions to either get more damage out of them from something like a Leper Gnome, or to have sticky minions with something like Haunted Creeper. This made it possible to flood and stick minions onto the board to then have minions to hit your opponent's face with. To help you stick these minions, you also had Eaglehorn Bow, which just so happened to synergize very well with another one of your Death Rattle minions, Mad Scientist. The combination of these two minions would almost always turn your Eaglehorn Bow into a 3-attack, 3 durability weapon, whilst also drawing and putting a secret from your deck into play. Even without that extra durability, and especially with it, the bow was very powerful when used to protect your board or hit your opponent in the face. If you weren't able to get the win before running out of steam with your 1 and 2 cost Death Rattle minions and Eaglehorn Bow, you could use cards like Kill Command, as well as the Hunter Hero Power to finish off your opponent before they can stabilize and turn the game in their favor. Alternatively, you could just not run out of steam at all by using the extremely powerful Starving Buzzard and Unleash the Hounds combo, which was as simple as putting Starving Buzzard into play and then playing Unleash the Hounds, which summoned a 1-attack charge beast for each enemy minion, which meant that every beast you summoned for each enemy minion, you also drew a card for each one. Just looking at this makes me sound like a liar when I said that Ancient of Lore was a super good draw card that every Druid deck would happily play. But that just goes to show how many levels above everything else the power level of this was. We'll address more on that later. But that's all well and good. An aggro deck with some cool nuance, synergistic packages, and a lot of draw. What's the big deal? Well, on top of all that, perhaps the biggest spike to your win rate came from the namesake card, Undertaker. Undertaker, a 1-mana, 1-attack, 2-health minion. When printed red, whenever you summon a minion with Death Rattle, gain 1 attack and 1 health. When you played this card on turn 1, back in the early days of Hearthstone, it was not easy to remove. Most classes didn't even have a good option to run, even if they wanted to. And if they didn't kill your Undertaker, you as the hunter would then follow it up with 1 or even 2 Death Rattle minions, turning this turn 1 minion into a spider tank's worth of stats, all before it's attacked even once. As you can imagine, if a class can't kill a 2-health minion on turn 1 or 2, it's probably not going to be very successful at killing a 4-health minion on turn 2 or 3. And Undertaker had the potential to just snowball from there, meaning you could outright win the game on turn 2 with this start if your opponent didn't have incredible answers to slow you down. And they don't have long to do that, staring down an early game board like this. So to adjust this broken deck, as well as some of the problematic play experiences it caused, the devs made changes to 2 of the cards in the deck. Firstly, the namesake. They changed it to now read, whenever you summon a minion with Death Rattle, gain 1 attack. You no longer gain the health, which means the card is not nearly as difficult to remove at any turn, especially when it snowballs early. And the reason they did this was because our turn 1 play that just wins the game is incredibly frustrating to play against. It often gained both attack and health stats significantly above those of other inexpensive minions very early in the game. With this change, we expect Undertaker will still be better than other 1-mana minions when played in a deck with a Death Rattle theme, but more likely to die in combat against other minions. Remember when I said earlier that Starving Buzzard was leaps above the rest? Well, I wasn't joking. To nerf this card, they didn't just make it 3 mana. They didn't even make it 4 mana. They more than doubled its cost all the way up to 5 mana. And all they did to compensate was give it 1 additional attack and 1 additional health. Their reasoning? The amount of cards Starving Buzzard allowed Hunter players to draw ultimately ended up being too excessive for its low cost. This change will allow the Hunter's opponent more time to react to both the Starving Buzzard and cards drawn by its power. Realistically, this change just put the card in timeout, as it was no longer playable, which was also kind of true for Undertaker, but that was at least still in the decks. But anyway, let's hop, skip, and jump to another deck. The next deck is one of my favorite Hearthstone decks of all time, Cube-Lock. This deck revolved around Carnivorous Cube. Carnivorous Cube was a 5-mana 4-attack 6-health minion. Battlecry, destroy a friendly minion. Death Rattle, summon 2 copies of it. So essentially, you'd eat that minion and store multiples for later. Naturally, looking at this card, the minions you would want to eat with the cube would be as large and as powerful as you could possibly get away with. You'd love to eat a Ragnaros, for example, but that would require playing Ragnaros and then keeping it alive on board so you can target it with Cube. That's asking a lot. As a result, the minions Cube-Lock ended up using happened to be mostly large demons, as large of demons as you had access to. The reason for this was because of the cards the Warlock class got in the Kobolds in Catacombs expansion that specifically helped you cheat out minions with the Demon Tribe. These cards or Possessed Lackey, and Skull of Minari, which allowed you to invest mana getting your demon into play ahead of time, so you could then use Cube and an enabler for Cube such as Dark Pact together in the following turn. And if you could get away with it, if you had enough mana, instead of killing the Cube, you could trigger its death rattle with a card like Spirit Singer Umbra. And you could keep the Cube's actual death rattle still in place for a nice double dip. As you can see, demons turned out to be quicker because of these cards than something like a Ragnaros, and in some situations, even more powerful. With those cards established, the way this deck worked was to basically build the rest of the deck as a control Warlock deck, filling it up with removal, health gaining, and draw tools. Because in addition to the fact that there were demon cheating cards released, Warlock also was given a large demon with Taunt in Void Lord, which was the perfect option to cheat out if you were at risk of dying. This meant the deck was perfect to be played in a control deck against an aggro opponent. And if you weren't against an aggro opponent, one of this deck's strengths was that you could turn into an aggressor by cheating out Doomguard, a 5 attack 7 health demon with charge. By using the Cube on Doomguard, you got to hit the opponent with the original Doomguard, and then also the 2 from the Cube's death rattle for an immediate 15 damage of burst. On top of all of this, on top of the healing, the big demons you played throughout the game, the deck also had access to a massive board-filling win condition in Blood Reaver Gul'dan. Suddenly, you realize that players didn't just stumble into demons being the best cards for this deck, but rather it was intended all along. Blood Reaver Gul'dan is a legendary Warlock hero card from the Knights of the Frozen Throne set. It is a 10 mana card that gains 5 armor, battlecry, summon all friendly demons that died this game. This gave you enough gas to oftentimes outvalue control decks. This meant that as a deck, Cubelock, with all of these cards and ideas brought together, was good at surviving against aggro with its control tools or cheating out a Void Lord, and it was fast enough to be the aggressor against combo decks by cheating out and making more Doomguards. And it could even outvalue with a full board on top of all of that with Blood Reaver Gul'dan. I suppose when you put it this way, you can see the problem. To bring the power level down, they hit the strongest spots: the cheating out of the big demons, and the incredibly efficient healing that Warlock had access to, while also duplicating these demons. To nerf the cheating out of demons, they adjusted Possessed Lackey, a 5 mana 2 attack 2 health minion death rattle recruit a demon. To nerf this, they simply increased its mana to 6. Some of the card combos involving Possessed Lackey present situations that are too difficult to deal with in the early to mid stages of the game. Increasing its mana cost to 6 delays some of those powerful card combos to turns that are easier for opposing decks to overcome. And to adjust the healing, they brought Dark Pact down a peg. Dark Pact was changed from a 1 mana spell that would destroy a friendly minion and heal for 8 to now only healing for 4. The reasoning? There are 2 aspects of Dark Pact that made it powerful. At a cost of 1 mana, it's easily used alongside cards like Carnivorous Cube, Possessed Lackey, and Spirit Singer Umbra for big combo turns. It also gives Warlocks enough healing potential so that aggressively losing life tap, their hero power, and playing cards like Kobold Librarian and Hellfire feel less consequential. We left Dark Pact's cost intact so it can still be used as part of interesting combos, but lessened the healing it provides so Warlocks will need to more carefully consider how much damage they take over the course of the match. That is how they adjusted Cubelock, one of Hearthstone's best decks. Now let's cowardly crawl to our next deck, Release Demon Hunter. I'm calling it Release Demon Hunter instead of Aggro or Midrange or Highlander Demon Hunter because I'm talking about all the various piles of cards that people experimented on day 1 of the Ashes of Outlands expansion, which just so happened to be the expansion that Demon Hunter was released alongside. The most common probably did resemble a quote-unquote mid-range Demon Hunter, which was essentially just a pile of powerful Demon Hunter cards ranging from like 1 to 8 mana, such as Crimson Sigil Runner, Eldrazi Warblade, Skull of Gul'dan, or Priestess of Fury. There were some more aggro-y builds, some combo builds, and some Highlander builds too though, because realistically, as long as you played the good Demon Hunter cards, or really just the class at all, you were bound to win at least all of the games not against other Demon Hunters. To illustrate the power level of these cards in this class, let's go over what they changed. The following Demon Hunter card nerfs were the fastest card nerfs in Hearthstone history, being nerfed on April 8th. The expansion released on April 7th. Skull of Gul'dan, the first powerful card, a 5 mana spell that draws cards if outcast and reduces their cost. Outcast means that if the card is on the left or the right side of your hand, then the effect from outcast triggers in addition to the rest of the card. They made this cost 6 instead of 5. Imprisoned Antenna, a 5-mana minion that when it comes undormant, shoots for 10 to random enemies. They made this cost 6 instead of 5. I-Beam, a cheap spell that was lifesteal, deal 3 damage to a minion, but if it was outcast, it cost 0. They changed the outcast from costing 0 to costing 1. And then Eldrazi Warblades was simply a 2-attack 3 durability weapon with lifesteal. They changed it to have 2 durability instead of 3. I think from this footage you can see that comparatively the power level of Demon Hunter was quite fast and strong, and even with all of these changes was still going to naturally dominate. And it wasn't even just these 4 cards. As you can see, the comparative power level between Demon Hunter and everything else was quite egregious. And so to not let the game continue to be entirely dominated by the Demon Hunter class on its release, Blizzard stepped in, trying to make changes in a way that would bring all of these possible decks, the aggro, the mid-range, the Highlander, the combo, all down a level, which is why they nerfed these cards that were kind of just generally good as opposed to specifically good in certain decks. And they also didn't know what the players would yet decide and figure out was the best, so they just emergency nerfed throwing darts at a dartboard. I don't think there's any possible solution that more symbolizes just how ridiculously powerful something was, that they knew immediately within one day they had to just chuck options out there. They just had to do something. Normally they're way more calculated and way more slow with trying to see how things pan out and see what actually needs to be changed and how to do it. Here they were just like, uh-oh. Here, have some relief. And really, Demon Hunter, still incredibly good, would receive a lot more nerfs, and by the end of the Ashes of Outland expansion cycle, was already one of the most nerfed class in all of Hearthstone history, which is crazy given that it had 6 less years than all of the 9 original classes. But that is how they killed the release Demon Hunter, one of Hearthstone's most absurdly broken decks. Wham bam, thank you ma'am. Up next, Grim Patron Warrior. Patron Warrior, a warrior combo deck revolving around the use of Grim Patron, Warsong Commander, and Frothing Berserker. The strategy involved dealing damage to your own minions for your own gain. You saw this via drawing cards off your Acolyte of Pain, gaining armor from your Armor Smith, increasing the attack of your Frothing Berserker, or summoning more Grim Patrons, the namesake of the deck. It often played like a control deck that had to survive just long enough to assemble its lethal combo. The lethal combo went like this. Play Warsong Commander, which gives minions with 3 or less attack charge. You then play a minion with 3 or less attack, also playing Grim Patron, then play Grim Patron. You can then use Death Spite's Death Rattle, Whirlwind, or efficient trades on board to grow an army of Grim Patrons. You can then use all of your Grim Patrons to clear enemy minions or go face. And when you do this, with Frothing Berserker in play, the damage dealt to your patrons and enemy minions throughout all of this builds the attack of your Frothing Berserker, who also just so happened to have gotten charge from Warsong Commander when it was played. This led to incredibly high damage lethals from hand. Due to the high power level of the deck, Blizzard stepped in and mutilated it. They didn't just nerf it, they set it behind the barn out back. And nothing is safe back there. Warsong Commander had her effect entirely removed, turning it into nothing but a meme that we would all collectively reference for years. Your charge minions have +1 attack. We've talked about this deck a lot on this channel, so let's move on to our next Hearthstone deck that is one of the most powerful of all time. Jade Druid. Our story for Jade Druid begins November 30th, 2016, when Blizzard released the Druid deck recipe called the Lotus's Golems. This deck recipe shows us that Blizzard intended for Jade Druid to be played as it originally was, with a Gadgetzan Auctioneer and Innervate, the broken Innervate even, plus Jade Idol Shell, alongside Yogg-Saron Hope's End. However, due to Yogg-Saron dominating tournaments around this time, which came as a surprise to Blizzard, Yogg-Saron was nerfed to now stop casting spells if it removes itself from the board during its battlecry. So this meant that Jade Druid decks would look elsewhere from Yogg-Saron, but the Gadgetzan Auctioneer package did stick around. This is what the earliest Jade Druid decks built by players looked like, with Yogg-Saron coming out and Arcane Giant coming in, among other improvements. The deck's goal was to make bigger and bigger Jade Golems.
Will this turn I'll summon a larger and larger man, which will allow me later on to summon an even larger man.
They hoped to make these golems through Jade Spirit, Jade Behemoth, Aya Blackpaw, and then to use the Gadgetzan Auctioneer, Innervate, and Jade Idol synergies to shuffle and play many Jade Idols. Given Jade Idol and Innervate were cheap spells, they worked very well with Auctioneer, especially if Auctioneer himself itself, or some of the spells in your hand were reduced preemptively by Emperor Thaurissan. Eventually, players realized that Yaxaron could still be quite good and was worth a spot in the deck in case you wanted or needed a miracle that only he could provide. And give or take a couple cards here or there, this is how Jade Druid would continue to be played. Eventually, however, come the Summer Championships of 2017, Jade Druid had found a new shell to excel with. Out came the Auctioneer package, and in came the busted Ultimate Infestation and Spreading Plague. A timely played Spreading Plague allowed the deck to dominate aggro decks that were popping up in the meta, and through the use of Innervate, Wild Growth, and Nourish, an early Ultimate Infestation allowed the Druid to assemble massive resources, allowing them to keep playing their best cards for many turns. Eventually, if you needed to, the second Nourish and second Ultimate Infestation could be used late into the game to draw into a deck full of Jade Idols. This shell allowed the Druid to have more mana and cards than everyone else, and Spreading Plague and Jades allowed it to have a better board than anyone else. As you can imagine, it was a powerhouse as a result. So much so, the devs eventually had to start chipping away at its power. Blizzard started out with a long overdue nerf to the class as a whole by bringing Innervate from being the best card ever printed to a coin, and then tried to give aggro more of a chance by upping the mana on Spreading Plague from 5 to 6. Both of these nerfs have stuck around all the way to this day, not because the devs forgot about them, but because they were and still would be just that powerful. For Jade Druid fans, they can be thankful that the deck was strong enough to survive these two initial nerfs. So our story must continue. Following these changes, Jade Druid's builds adapted by removing Innervate and continuing to play the very powerful card known as Spreading Plague. Over the course of the entire next year, Jade Druid continued to dominate, and much like any deck over the course of a year, a card here or there changed depending on who built and played it. But come the start of 2018, the next Hearthstone World Championship was upon us, and Jade Druid was still a meta force, now basically being just the best 30 Druid cards, with an Arcane Tyrant or a random neutral here or there. After an entire year of Jade Druid dominance, including most of the competitors at the World Championship bringing Jade Druid in their lineup, you'd think that Blizzard would decide to weaken Jade Druid again, but they still didn't, and Jade Druid dominated for an entire second year, all the way up to December 2018, more than 2 years after our story started in November 2016. It wasn't until then that they finally decided to take more action, when, on December 19th, 2018, the Druid class's foundation for the last 5 years would take a severe hit. In patch 13.0.3.28329, Wild Growth and Nourish were nerfed to make room for different Druid cards and decks to quote-unquote shine and to give players a break from them. The patch reads, Wild Growth and Nourish have been present in every mid-range combo and control Druid deck since their introduction. When cards from the basic and classic set are too powerful, they can have negative long-term effects on the game. Continuously playing against these cards can start to feel repetitive, and they can feel so mandatory that they stifle creative deck building decisions. By increasing the mana cost of both cards by 1, we expect them to be considerations in late-game control Druid decks, but more difficult to fit in strategies that don't directly take advantage of ramping mana. With that, 5 cards from Jade Druid lists in total were nerfed. Given this video's title, it does beg the question if those nerfs were a result of Jade Druid or the class as a whole. When a deck gets nerfed via an adjustment to its namesake like Undertaker, it's clear what they're targeting. When they nerf cards that are powerful enough to dominate within other strategies of the class, it's less clear. In my opinion, hitting the Jade cards wouldn't have done anything but remove the fun of green men. They were strong, sure, but the most power came from the mana cheating, Innervate, Wild Growth, Nourish, as well as from Spreading Plague and Ultimate Infestation. Given 4 of these cards got nerfed, I think it's fair to include the story of Jade Druid in this video. Blizzard just so happened to chop an axe to the entire Druid class in the process. Last but certainly not least is Highlander Priest, but I refuse to call it that. Up next is Raza Priest, a strategy built around Raza the Chained, as well as Kazakis and Reno Jackson. Reno Jackson allowed the priests to fully heal to save themselves from aggro decks, and Kazakis provided great flexibility with potions that you got to handcraft for whatever situation you found yourself in. And the key card, Raza the Chained, allowed the priests to heal for 0 with their hero power the rest of the game, as well as importantly, use Shadow Reaper Anduin's hero power for a 0 mana, 2 damage hero power in the late game. Because I'm calling it Raza Priest and not Highlander Priest, I'm sure many of you know exactly what deck I'm talking about. But for those who don't, the reason I don't like calling it Highlander Priest is because there were multiple Highlander Priest decks in this era. Whether it be surrounding the Dragon package, built with Draconid Operative and Netherspite Historian in mind, or perhaps a Death Rattle package trying to win with N'Zoth the Corruptor or Awaken the Makers, the Ungoro quest for Priest that gave you 40 health if you played a bunch of Death Rattle minions. But for the most part, the iconic and strongest version revolved around a burst damage combo oriented version. This is the version of the deck we are talking about today. In the early game, Raza Priest aimed to control the board, removing minions, saving life, drawing cards. In the mid game, it benefited from its key cards we've already discussed, Kazakus, Raza, and Reno. And then in the late game, thanks to Shadow Reaper Anduin, the negative effects of being a Highlander or Singleton deck were dampened because of the 0 mana deal 2 damage hero power that refreshed every time you played a card. It didn't matter if you only had one copy of the best removal cards, as now every card had a free 2 damage to go alongside it. Furthermore, you can see here where the combo potential to kill the opponent comes in, whether it be whittling them down or ramping up pressure big time by bursting them down with Spawn of Shadows. This meant that Raza Priest was a control deck with the premium removal and healing the Priest class is known for, could instantly join the dark side by playing an 8 mana card, which then meant the Priest was basically threatening lethal every turn for the rest of the game. The amount of damage you can do when every card now comes with a free fireball is not surprisingly very high. And the deck could get away with running lots of cheap cards in the same way it could get away with the downsides of being a Highlander deck, by having the free hero power to go alongside of them. So every card wasn't kind of an inefficient, weak, 1-cost card in the late game. It was a really powerful 1-cost card in the late game with that damage. Funnily enough, when I was looking this deck up, I found a sentence on the wiki that talked about how Highlander Priest became an extremely dominant deck following the nerfs targeting Jade Druid. So I guess there is some consensus that Jade Druid was in fact targeted and did in fact get killed in that way. But given that Jade Druid was now out of the way, Raza Priest became an extremely dominant deck in the meta, which unfortunately for Raza enjoyers meant that in patch 10.2.0.23180, Raza's hero power reduction would be unfortunately capped from 0 to 1, which dramatically reduced any burst damage the deck once had. 0 to 1 mana is about as much as you can kill a card without going full Warsong, especially in this case when you're upping it from 0 to 1 mana with every single card you play. 2 years later, eventually Raza would be unnerfed, but in those 2 years, Raza Priest was entirely killed in every format in every way you could possibly think of. That is the story how Hearthstone killed its best decks. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.